This is the Carta Marina, the first ever detailed map of Scandinavia. It was made by Olaus Magnus and published in 1539. In the very furthest north of the most northern part of Europe stands a bearded man holding two staves carved with ancient runes. Beside him are the words Starkaðr Pugil Sueticus, Starkad Swedish boxer. Who was this fighting man at the top of the world? Why does he hold the runes of the pagan times? And how does he connect to a prehistoric Indo-European tradition of a warrior poet equivalent to Hercules in Greece and others in India and Ireland? Starkaðr, as he was known to the Norse, anglicised as Starkad, is holding runes because he was associated with everything old in the Nordic tradition. According to medieval historian Margaret Clunies-Ross, this association already existed centuries before this map, when Starkad appears in several Icelandic, Danish and Anglo-Saxon stories as a complicated, criminal warrior hero, full of contradictions. In these legends, he is just a man, but it seems Starkad was originally a divine or semi-divine figure with monstrous attributes like extra arms, who was gradually humanized over the Viking Age in mythology and poetry. Similar equivalents of Starkad have been identified in the myths of ancient Greece, ancient Ireland, and India. This archetype is incredibly strong. He hates the poor and is very rude to women, and is sometimes described as a lone wolf. In other words, it's a Sigma male. Starkad appears in the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf. Though he isn't named, we can tell it's him because of the story. It's the same story found elsewhere where he is named. In Beowulf, this unnamed hero gives a rousing speech to the Herakles, encouraging them to get revenge for their fallen king, Frodo. 200 or so years later, we see the exact same story depicted in a Danish work by the chronicler Saxo Grammaticus called Gesta Danorum, which was written in the 12th century. Here, Saxo, writing in Latin, names the old warrior as Starkaðr and says he was noble and very large, almost superhuman, with an incredible preeminence of spirit and body. But despite this, was still the merely human son of Sturvirkir. He also writes that Starkad was famous for his courage and his artistry in composing songs or spells, and was a man regularly at the side of the distressed, one who often happily intervened to rescue people in desperate straits. In other words, a warrior poet hero. Because Saxo was a Christian, he really heavily disapproved of the pagan elements in the stories that he wrote down for us. And for that reason, he always says that the gods are just men, and that's called euhemerism. And he does that routinely. But he doesn't just turn gods into mere humans, but he also turns other magical and supernatural elements into more mundane and less exciting things. So while Saxo says that he personally thinks Starkad was just an Estonian or some other person from the savage lands east of Sweden, he admits that others believe Starkad to have been born of a Jotun, that's like a giant, and that he had extra arms before the god Thor tore the extra ones off. And he also says that many believe that Starkad was blessed by Odin to live 3 lifetimes, but that he was cursed to commit sins in those lifetimes. Of course, he calls Odin just a wizard rather than a god. But anyway, these same elements that we see in Saxo's telling or a confession of the pagan elements in his story are told in a less complicated way in Gautreks Saga, which I'll get to a bit later. As in Gautreks Saga, Starkad kills King Vikar, who Saxo calls Vikarus, as a blot for Odin, and this was done by deception, promising the king only a symbolic hanging, but in the end tightening the knot and actually hanging the king and stabbing him with his sword. After this, Saxo refers to Starkad as Senex, meaning wise old man. Starkad later lives in Uppsala, which had been ruled by the god Frey, who Saxo says was actually a human. Saxo reports that Starkad did not like the rituals to Frey because they involved the unmanly clattering of bells, as well as dancing and miming. The rest of Saxo's account of the life of Starkaðr concerns his battles and victories in the service of several kings, and his adventures in Russia and Byzantium. In one scene, which is the same one as in Beowulf, Starkad learns his friend, King Frotho, has been deposed through deceit, and that Frotho's son, Ingel, is the new king, but is friends with his father's enemies. Starkad goes to Denmark, but Ingel is out hunting, and the king's wife mistakes Starkad for a mere peasant, so she tells him not to sit with his betters at the feast. Starkad is furious, but retains his composure long enough to step outside, where he rages autistically at a wall. When Ingel returns, he tries to placate the raging Starkad by offering him nice food at the banquet, but Starkad refuses, for he had no wish to allow his celebrity as a warrior to be impaired by the enticements of an orgy. He then eats some smoky rancid food instead, which he considers more fitting for his station. The queen insults him again by offering him a feminine bracelet, which he in turn throws in her face. He then throws a bone at a flautist, and erupting in rage, performs a poem in which he ridicules the king and his wife, essentially calling her a slag and admonishing him for not having avenged his own father. It works perfectly, and spurns Ingel to attack his father's enemies and kill them all with Starkad's help. Saxo writes that Ingel's newfound good character replenished the goblets with blood instead of wine. The wine here symbolizes a mercantile producer class, while the blood, which is superior, symbolizes the higher class of warrior aristocrats and kings. Starkad's refusal of the fancy foods also shows the need for the warrior class to separate itself from the decadence of consumption associated with the third social function. Later in the story, after Starkad has been attacked by 9 canine berserker Menabund warriors, and he is lying bleeding with his guts hanging out, he snobbishly refuses help from 3 different people, all of whom he considers inferior to himself. One of these was a bailiff who obtained wealth through ignoble means. The second was a man who married a low-class servant woman beneath his rank and thus breached the etiquette of class distinctions. And the other was herself a slave woman. And so all of them were considered beneath the warrior rank and not worthy of helping Starkad. He has this really strict concern with rank and class distinctions, and that shows up in other stories about Starkad as well, so it's not just within this context. Earlier in Saxo's narrative, Starkad castrates a goldsmith because he was engaged to marry King Ingel's sister, who was of royal rank. The goldsmith, in his view, was too low in rank to marry one of royal blood. However, he considers smiths who forge weapons to be superior to those who make gold jewelry, saying, "In my view, they are superior who forge swords and spears for the battles of men." This again reflects a disdain for fancy and decadent lifestyles, which he associates with the inferior producer class rather than the warrior class to which kings are supposed to belong. Starkad's story is also told in a section of the aforementioned Gautreks saga called Vikarstotr. In this version, Starkad is not an 8-armed Jotun, but rather his grandfather is an 8-armed Jotun, who is also called Starkad, and who abducts a girl and impregnates her, thus angering Thor, who kills him because he fancied the girl. The girl's child was the dark-haired Storvirker, who in turn had a child called Starkad, who is the same as our hero in the other stories, and who has the same scars as his grandfather, whose extra arms were torn off by Thor. The story begins with his youth, when Starkad was raised by his foster father, King Harald. He later becomes foster brothers with Harold's son, Vikar, and the two grow up to be friends. After King Harold gets killed, then Starkad is raised by a mysterious figure called Horsehair Grani, and that's really Odin in disguise. Vikar and Starkad grow up to be friends, and they go on adventures together, and they get revenge for the people who killed Harold. They go around pillaging, and basically Starkad becomes Vikar's right-hand man, and Vikar is a king. The two young boys didn't know it when they're growing up, but they had both been selected by Odin to participate in an Odinic sacrificial rite as the sacrificer and the sacrificed. And Odin had a plan all along to bring this about. At one point, Vikar's fleet is stranded near an island. They perform a divinatory ritual which reveals that Odin requires a human sacrifice. They then draw lots and determine that Vikar is to be the sacrificial victim.
Starkad is taken into a grove in the woods on the island by Horsehair Grani, where he witnesses a council of the gods. Here Thor and Odin each bestow blessings and curses on Starkad. Odin lays the blessings, but Thor is prejudiced against Starkad because of his Jotun ancestry, and because Thor was jealous of Starkad's Jotun grandfather, since he had sexual designs on the girl that Starkad the Elder had abducted and impregnated. So Thor counters Odin's blessings with related curses. Thor cursed Starkad to be childless, so Odin gave blessings of living 3 whole lifetimes. Thor then cursed him to commit a crime in each of those. When Odin bestowed on Starkad victory in every battle, and the blessing of possessing the most excellent of weapons, Thor countered with a curse that he would be gravely wounded in each battle. Odin blessed him with riches, but Thor cursed him to never be satisfied with his property, and never to possess an estate. Odin gave the gift of poetry, but Thor said he shall always forget his poems. Odin bestowed the boon of being beloved by kings and the wealthy, but Thor cursed him to be hated by the common folk. Afterwards, Odin asks for payment for his blessings in the form of the sacrifice of King Vikar, and gives Starkad a special reed for the job. Starkad sets up a mock sacrifice of the king using calf intestine as rope and a twig as a tree, but when he says the ritual words, "Now I give you to Odin," and stabs at the king with the reed, it suddenly turns into a real spear, and the intestine becomes willow-withy. The twig becomes a proper gallows tree, and the king is killed in a typically Odinic execution rite. The scholar of comparative mythology, Georges de Mézil, wrote that this sacrifice was beneficial to all 3 concerned. Vikar receives an honourable death, and is received into Valhall. Odin has acquired a noble king as his servant, and Starkad has repaid the god for his blessings and helped his childhood friend to enter the warrior's paradise. Despite this, the murder of a king was a heinous crime, and Starkad is racked with guilt, such that he composes the following poem. Skulde ek viker, I vithi hovum, girthjofs bana, godum of signa. Lagtha ek geri, gram til hjarta, that mør harmast handavirka.
Starkad is then so hated in Hordaland, the region of Norway he was in, that he has to flee to Uppsala on the eastern side of Sweden. And there he is tormented by berserkers who mock him. And he then speaks this verse in which he specifically mentions the monster Jotun marks, which he inherited on him from his grandfather of the same name.
Here they set me, much mocked and white-eyelashed, between serving men. The fellows mock and, exceedingly cautious, hold the prince's poet up to ridicule. They think they can see on myself the giant marks of the 8 arms, when Hlorithi tore off the arms of Herr Grimr's slayer, north of the crag. Starkad appears in other sources too, namely Ynglinga Saga and Hervarar Saga, which each contain other versions of the same story. He is also in Nornagesthotr, but there Starkad is depicted as a mere coward who flees from the real hero, Sigurd.
Why are you running?
Therefore, to obtain a clearer picture of who Starkaðr was and where his story comes from, we need to rely on comparative mythology. Starkad has been an important figure in Indo-European comparative mythology since 1956, when Dumezil first compared Starkad to Hercules, who is also a transgressive warrior who insults the three Indo-European social classes. And he also compared both to the Hindu god Indra, but he later revised this theory, replacing Indra with Krishna's wicked cousin Siśupāla, who is a much better fit for the transgressive warrior archetype. Dumezil's trifunctional hypothesis states that Indo-European people had societies and religions divided into three distinct roles: warriors, priests, and producers or farmers. Both Starkad and Siśupāla commit specific sins against the three social classes or castes. In 1977, David Cohen identified a Celtic equivalent of this archetype in the Irish warrior poet Suibhne or Suibhne the Madman. The similarities between Starkaðr, Herakles, Suibhne, and Siśupāla are striking and were elaborated on further by Jan Puvel in 1987. He wrote, "The Scandinavian version seems prototypical, for most of its features are matched in either India or Greece, while many traits of the latter two lack a parallel elsewhere." So let's take a closer look at how these other figures compare to Starkad, starting in India. Siśupāla of Chedi was born with the mark of Shiva, that is, an extra eye. He was also born with 4 arms, which were destined to be removed by a god, just as Thor removed the extra arms, just as Thor admonished Starkad for the transgressions of his ancestor and imposed curses upon him. The name Siśupāla is based on the god Shiva's epithet Pashupati, master of animals. Siśupāla means young master, and so in essence makes him Shiva Jr. Starkad is thought to come from 2 parts. Starkaðr. Stark means strong, and Huth means either battle, or it may invoke the god Húðr, who is the same god that killed Starkad, and who, due to his blindness, is believed by several scholars to be either Odin or at least an Odinic god of sorts, despite the fact he actually kills Odin's own son, Baldur, in one myth. The name thus has the same essential meaning as the Hebrew name Gabriel, strong like God. So both Starkad and Siśupāla have cryptic names which invoke the gods to whom they are connected. As an adult, Siśupāla served as marshal to King Jarasandh of Magadh, and he captured a load of kings who he intended to sacrifice to Shiva, just like Starkad sacrificed a king to Odin. Jarasandh is then killed by Bhim in a wrestling match, and all the captured kings are freed. And now, Yudhishthir can become the greatest king of all. At the ceremony, all the kings are present, and Yudhishthir agrees to give a special gift to the worthiest visitor, to be selected by Bhishma, who chooses Krishna. This really pisses off the ultra-royalist Siśupāla, because Krishna was not even a king, and to select him above all the kings present was an insult to the majesty of royalty. Just like Starkad, Siśupāla hates the lower classes and loves kings. So he goes on to insult Krishna, calling him a vicious serf and also a mere herdsman. Some of the audience agree with Siśupāla, and the ceremony is threatened. Bhishma and Siśupāla exchange harsh insults, of the sort Starkad also dishes out. Siśupāla gets angrier and challenges Krishna to a fight, not realizing that he has now already used up the 100 sins that Krishna promised he would excuse. Krishna then adds a sexual insult, saying that Siśupāla, who was once betrothed to Krishna's wife, Rukmini, but failed to marry her because Krishna whisked her away from the wedding himself, could no more win her than a low-caste Shudra could get to hear the Vedas. This really boils Siśupāla's blood, so he comes back with another sexual insult, saying that Krishna should not advertise the fact his wife was sloppy seconds. As depicted in the 1993 TV drama Shri Krishna, the god then whips out his predator-style disc weapon, Sudarshan Chakra, and ends the life of his Sigma male cousin. As he dies, a radiance emanates from Siśupāla's corpse and unites with Krishna, thus becoming divine. This mirrors the death of Starkad. If you recall, Thor cursed Starkad to commit 3 serious crimes for each of the 3 lifetimes he was blessed by Odin to live. These turn out to be betraying, forsaking, and murdering rulers of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. His final horrible sin, as recorded by Saxo, is to accept 120 pounds of gold from a group of conspirators in exchange for stabbing his friend the Danish king Ollo to death in his bath. This crime goes against everything Starkad believes in, but with it, he has exhausted his sentence and may now die, just as Siśupāla could be killed only after committing 100 sins. The cowardly murder of King Ollo sends Starkad into a depression, and he wants to die, but not by any peaceful means. Saxo tells us that the son of one of the men who previously bribed Starkad was out to kill him now, and when Starkad meets him, a man called Hathrus, and learns that he is of noble blood, he asks Hathrus to be the one to kill him. Hathrus is a Latinization of Hörthr, who is the aforementioned blind god in Norse mythology, but in this encounter, it is actually Starkad who has gone blind from old age. Both Starkad and Hörthr are Odinic figures, and in this sense, the slaying of one by the other is a reflection of the Odinic sacrifice of Odin to himself, as recorded in the Eddic poem Hávamál. Before he dies, Starkad offers Hathrus the power of invincibility, if he will, having decapitated him, step between his severed head and body. The decapitation and the subsequent magical unification of the slayer and slain resembles the emanation which radiates from the corpse of Siśupāla after he is slain, and which then joins with Krishna. Both derive from an original Indo-European myth which involved some kind of magical power or life force collected from the corpse of the slain warrior poet. So to recap, both Starkad and Siśupāla are warrior poets. Mahabharata, Book 2, the Book of the Assembly Hall, portrays him as engaging in a long, intricately abusive speech before his death. These abuses are often of a sexual nature and are also concerned with rank, just as Starkad insults King Ingel and his wife by calling the queen wanton and implying sexual impropriety, and thus undeserving of her royal rank.
You bitch!
So does Siśupāla call Krishna a mere herdsman and a cow killer. And he says Bhishma's royal celibacy is just a cope, used to disguise his impotence, emphasizing the effeminacy of his opponent. Finally, he insults Krishna himself, saying he has a second-hand wife.
Both are enemies of the lower classes, but they love kings, and they could say they were ultra-royalists. But their relationships to kings are problematic. Starkad loves kings, but he ends up killing them anyway. And Siśupāla, in his defense of royalty, ends up capturing loads of kings, and, ironically, attacking the true universal king. Both of them are connected to a dark, Menabund god, Odin and Rudrashiva, respectively. And both of them are enemies of a strong, lower-class god, that's Thor and Krishna, respectively, who removes the extra arms that each was born with.
The animosity between the warrior and the strongman god is derived from sexual competition. Starkad's earlier incarnation had competed with Thor for Elfhildr, while Siśupāla had competed with Krishna for Rukmini, although in India the god gets the girl, while Thor loses out in the Norse version. Even Thor punishing Starkad for his grandfather's sins resembles how Vishnu, of whom Krishna is an incarnation, pursued the same demonic adversary through several incarnations, as Hiranyakasipu, then Ravana, the king of the Rakshasas of Lanka, and finally Siśupāla.
I think the main difference between them is that the Norse version is far more sympathetic to the warrior poet hero archetype, while Siśupāla is more demonic. And that's probably because in Norse religion, Odin, the Menabun god, had risen to the rank of Skyfather, whereas in Indian religion, in Hinduism, Krishna was the 8th avatar of Vishnu and the supreme god in his own right. So he by far outranks Shiva, which means that you can't really excuse Siśupāla's insults of Krishna in any way. Even if Siśupāla is associated with Shiva, it's not good enough because Krishna is so important in the Indian religion by that stage.
The Celtic equivalent of Starkad is seen in a more degenerate form because it has been heavily Christianized. The story of the hero Suibhne, whose name became the English Suibhne, is recorded in Bila Suibhne, or the Madness of Suibhne. He is not directly tied to a god, nor even does he exhibit demonic physical deformities. However, just as Starkad and Siśupāla commit trifunctional sins against the social classes, so too does Suibhne. He is a prominent warrior hero in Gaelic lore, who is also recorded as a poet in the Irish legendary literary tradition. He is also associated with kings. Either he was a king himself, or he was a kind of stand-in king for when the king was absent, which is equivalent both to Hercules and to Siśupāla. Regardless of whether Suibhne was a king, we should remember that in Germanic, Indian and Irish tradition, the king comes from the warrior class, so this still ties him to the Indo-European warrior archetype of Starkad. Suibhne's story is highlighted by his unprovoked outrages against a more moral and holy character, Saint Ronan, who fills a very similar role in this Irish Christian narrative as Krishna does in the Hindu version. Suibhne goes mad and then becomes a wandering outcast and a poet, just like Starkad was in his later life. And Suibhne specifically says he lives among wolves and enjoys their howling, which connects him to the wolf god of the Menabund. When Suibhne dies, we also see a reflection of the divine integration of the slain, as we saw in the Nordic and Indian myths. Just like with Siśupāla, there is a prophecy about his death, only in this prophecy it is said that Suibhne shall attain heaven in death. He dies in a liminal space, the doorway of a church, and then his soul goes to heaven, which is the closest acceptable approximation of unifying with a god within a Christianized narrative. The Greek equivalent of the Indo-European warrior poet hero is not as neat a fit as the others. The famous Heracles or Hercules, the demigod, is, like Starkad, at the center of the conflict between gods. Hera, who persecutes him, and Zeus, who helps him through his daughter Athena. Just like Starkad and Siśupāla, he has a paradoxical link with the divinity who persecutes him. Hera nursed him as a baby, and he takes his name from her, so his name is related to a god, just like those of his Indian and Nordic counterparts. Yet they are persecuted by a different god than the one their name relates to. After he dies and goes to Olympus, the realm of the gods, he becomes divine, and there he is adopted by Hera as her son, which is similar to the other examples of a divine unification in death previously mentioned. Heracles is not truly a warrior poet like Starkad, but he is called a singer, which is similar especially in the Greek tradition where poems such as the Iliad are said to have been sung. He also becomes a toiling wanderer, just like Starkad and Suibhne, and then commits 3 major crimes: defiance of Zeus, which leads to madness and infanticide; secondly, an ignoble and sneaky attack on Iphitus of Oechalia, after agreeing to help him find his lost cattle but then throwing him from the wall of Tiryns and killing him, a crime comparable to Starkad killing King Ollo; and finally, adultery with Iola. But Heracles is not quite the same as the others. Heracles is extraordinarily strong, but he is never called ugly. Rather, he is handsome because Greek heroes have to be, and he is not a royalist either, since the Greek political landscape looked unfavourably on monarchy in general. He has lost the monstrous aspects, and is less complicated and contradictory as a heroic figure. Pouvel wrote, "In Greece, Heracles remains a positive hero and conciliation prevails, but the pantheonic oppositions have become obfuscated. Zeus tries to take care of his son through the proxy of his head-born daughter, and inveighs against his pernicious better half for her persecution of Heracles, with Olympian household tensions replacing inherited Indo-European antagonisms. These antagonisms involve an opposition of demonic and life-enhancing deities within the warrior class. It is the difference between a figure of monstrous ancestry or attachments and one who makes the world safe against monsters, a kind of nature-culture tension in which the warrior is caught up. Rudra, with his 3 eyes and 4 arms, one-eyed Odin of giant ancestry riding an 8-legged horse, Hera, born of Titans and parthenogenous mother of the monster Typhon. All these fit the demonic slot, to which the hero has definite onomastic associations. The contrasting deity is one who prunes the wild by holding down the monstrous, Indra or Trita Aptya slaying Triceres, Thor cutting back on giants, Athena wearing the Gorgon's head on her breastplate, and furthering normal nature, releasing waters, nurturing vegetation, protecting the young. The warrior hero is somehow genetically and inherently demonic, and his career is marked by the drama between this ancestral burden and the rehabilitational and civilizing efforts under the figurative, and in Athena's case literal, aegis of the opposing deity. In conclusion, the Indo-European warrior poet archetype is caught in a conflict between 2 types of god. Firstly, a demonic god, connected to the race of beings to which the gods are normally opposed, and secondly, a god who fights back against monstrous, wild nature, such as Thor. The hero poet has a demonic element, but also a civilized element, which makes him love hierarchy and order. Thus he is caught between the 2, a tragic and divided figure.
Really central to his identity is that he is a poet, and he uses poetry in an insulting way like a weapon, usually before he physically attacks his opponent. His poetry is also used to praise the kings that he loves, and he is usually the champion of a king or a general or some kind of under-king even.
He has noble qualities and is physically very strong, but is hideous and has monstrous attributes. He is also a wanderer without a fixed abode, and in the cases of Starkad and Suibhne, is associated with the wolf, a wandering outsider in the wild, and this may mean the character was originally associated with the Menabund, although Starkad is directly opposed to the Berserker Menabund. In Starkad's case, the hatred of the Berserkers is a manifestation of the general hatred the warrior poet has for the lower classes, and so is unlikely to reflect an original tension between the warrior poet and the wolfish Menabund. His poetry also has themes of sexual shaming, implying effeminacy of men, and sexual impropriety in women, both of which relate to his concern with natural hierarchy and Indo-European ethics. The warrior poet archetype is also mad. He goes into mad rages, which incite him either to compose poems or to commit acts of violence, as we see with Starkad. Siśupāla also expresses his rage through invective and spurs others on to acts of violence with it, while Suibhne's madness is connected to his gift of divinatory ability. Hercules frequently goes mad with rages, one of which caused him to murder his music teacher Linus with a lyre. It seems likely that the vocation of bard or poet, one so valued for the power to form and preserve the kleros, or immortal fame of the warrior, was originally limited to those of the warrior caste. This also explains the dutiful ultra-royalism of the warrior-poet archetype, since kings, warriors and poets were probably all of the same caste among the Indo-Europeans. However, this theory is contradicted by the way that in Dumézil's studies of praise and blame poetry in Rome and Ireland, the poets often belong to the third function, or class, consisting of the farmers or producers.
In the Germanic hierarchy, poetry is strongly associated with the priestly function and with Odin. Although unlike in other Indo-European religions, the Germanic hierarchy does not devote a separate caste for the priests, but rather sees divine religious knowledge as belonging to the kings who themselves come from the warrior caste. So this is consistent with Starkad, who is deeply Odinic, and is by far the best preserved example we have of this Indo-European warrior poet Sigma male archetype. Hail Starkad!
I'd like to thank the artists who contributed to this video. Christian Sloan Hall produced this image of Starkad, and his art is also available as t-shirts in my Teespring store, links in description. Graman provided the artwork of the Gaelic hero Suibhne. And the Instagram meme lord Chad Pastoralist helped me out with the Sigma male memes. Perhaps you have questions about this video or others I've made. Well, I'll answer them, and you'll get priority for those answers on my AMA sessions on my Jive Talks channel if you are a patron on Patreon or Subscribestar. I also host voice chats on my Telegram channel, where I speak directly to my patrons and answer any questions they have personally. And if you really like this kind of content, then you really have to support it, because I cannot do this unless I have support from my patrons. So please head over to Patreon or Subscribestar and contribute so that I can continue creating this content, and in the process you'll get access to all kinds of exclusives. Thanks, and keep surviving the jive.